Hey book lovers, Victoria here and you're watching My Books and Me. Today is part 2 of my little duology series I got going on. Last week I did a video on tips and tricks that you can do or you should do while you're trying to read a book for school. This week I'm going to share with you guys the books that I read in high school. Now in my school, in my state, because we all study the same curriculum here in New South Wales, we had to read a novel every year of high school, one novel every year. So from year 7 to year 12 I read some form of novel every year and had to write an essay on it, and in year 11 and 12 I also had to use it in my exams. No, 10, 11, 12 in my exams. Now, I actually own every single book that I read in high school except for one, because I can't even remember what I read in year 11 and I'm beginning to think I didn't read a novel. Now as I said last week, if you saw my video, I was quite lucky in high school in the fact that the books that we read were ones that I really enjoyed, and that is evident obviously by the fact that I currently own them, because, well, for me, I didn't have to buy books every year, the school obviously provided them. So I'm just going to go through the books that I read in high school and hopefully give you guys something interesting to read. So in year 7 I had a fantastic teacher and we ended up reading Hatchet by Gary Paulson. This is the first book in the Brian Saga series, and this is about this 13-year-old boy whose parents are divorced, and for the first summer that they are divorced he has to fly from New York to the mines, I think it is, in southern Canada, sort of on the border, and it's all very wilderness, and he's flying in like this 2-seater plane, and while they're in the air the pilot has a heart attack and dies, and Brian has to fly the plane and he ends up crash landing it into a lake, and it's all about him trying to survive in the wilderness until he gets rescued. And it's called Hatchet because before he left his mum gave him a gift of a hatchet and he uses that to help him survive. It's a really good story, and I was actually in the middle of rereading it this year. I kind of stopped, but I highly recommend it, and it's just really interesting. It's a really good survival novel, it's a really good adventure novel, and if you want to read something set in Canada by a Canadian author, this is a really good start as well, because, you know, Canada. The next book was year 8, and I've actually I reread this book last year and it's just as good as I remember. It's shorter than I remember though, and that is Hitler's Daughter by Jackie French. This is a really interesting novel, very thought-provoking. This is about these kids who are waiting for the school bus on rainy days, gets one of the girls, Anna, to tell a story. One of them comes up, or really the youngest girl, comes up with the story idea, and Anna tells a story, and usually it's about like princesses and things like that, but this one time Anna decides she's going to be the one to come up with the story idea and tell the story. So she tells the story of Heidi, Hitler's secret daughter, who has a huge birthmark on her face. She does not look anything like the ideal race that Hitler wanted, and for Anna, she doesn't really know that Hitler is her father, kind of. But she doesn't realise that Hitler is this evil guy that he really was. He just assumes that he is obviously leading the Germans in this war, but doesn't realise that the Germans are in the wrong. And this is just a really interesting concept. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and upon rereading it last year it was just really interesting. It is definitely, like I said, a lot shorter than I remember it being, and I highly recommend it. This is aimed for children, for a children middle grade audience, because the idea of it is to introduce them to the Second World War and to Hitler and to the Holocaust without it being overpowering and like too graphic for them. It's just a nice introduction. It does talk about facts and figures and what happened, but it's not overly graphic, it's not overly traumatizing for a younger audience. And I think Jackie French did a really good job at that, and I definitely recommend this because it is such an interesting concept of the whole Hitler has a daughter. She's the complete opposite of what Hitler wants in his ideal race, and she doesn't really know that Hitler is the evil guy that he is. Very interesting and highly recommend it. Next book was in year 9, and it was seriously the best book I read in high school. It was perfect, and I mentioned this on my channel recently, and that is Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden, the first book in the Tomorrow series. This was fantastic. Last week I mentioned that for one of my books, we listened to the entire audiobook in class, and this was it as a class every week, or every lesson for about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. I can't quite remember. We listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook for this firstly was fantastic. And listening to it as a class was just really fun, because even though we could go home and read ahead and everything, it was just really great to be all pretty much at the same pace within class. It was a really good book, and I love this one so much. It is about if Australia was invaded by a foreign army and was using a very small town and a very small coastal town as their base to infiltrate the country. And it's about these 6 teenagers who are camping for the weekend, that they are invaded, and upon returning they find that the entire town has been held hostage, and that there is this army, and that World War III is about to start, and it's about them trying to survive and fight back. And it's awesome. It's got amazing characters, strong kick-ass female lead, and I love it so much. Definitely recommend it. And actually, filming this, I filmed this on the 19th. What's the date today? And actually it's currently the 20th today, and so on the 23rd, which was last week when you're watching this, the first episode of the TV series came out, and I'm on the fence about that. I might have changed my opinion after the first episode, but yeah, TV series has just come out. There is already a movie. There has been a movie out about this. Amazing book, amazing series, highly recommended. Best book I ever read in high school. Yeah, it can happen, people. You can read an amazing book in high school. This book was year 10. A little bit difficult. Year 10 reading books in high school was starting to lose its appeal, especially because the teacher I had, she was alright, but I didn't like her for the topic we were reading this book for. But anyway, the book we read was Marcus Zuzak's The Messenger. I can't actually remember too much about this book. And so I'm just going to read the blurb, because I definitely think it describes the book really well, and I hope to reread this soon. Ed Kennedy, cab driving prodigy, pathetic card player, useless at sex, shares coffee with his dog and is in nervous love with Audrey. His life is one of suburban routine and incompetence until he inadvertently stops a bank robbery. That's when the first ace turns up and Ed becomes the messenger. Protect the diamonds, survive the clubs, dig deep through spades, feel the hearts. Chosen to care, he travels through town helping and hurting until only one question remains: where are the messages coming from? So like I said, I don't really remember too much about this, but it's essentially about this guy who keeps getting the aces with just little points of dates, times, places written on them, and he has to go and sort of figure out why on earth he's been sent there and what on earth he has to do. One thing I can vaguely remember about this was, I'm pretty sure it's something like he sees like the wife getting raped by the husband, and he ends up sending him out of town kind of thing. I can't quite remember. It is kind of a little bit more adult. There probably are some trigger warnings in here, but I can't quite remember. But Marcus Zuzak is a fantastic author and a fantastic Australian author, and this book, from what I can remember, even though I had a little bit of trouble reading it in high school and I kind of didn't enjoy it as much because of that, the overall story was actually really well done, and I think it quite surprised me when I read it, and I can't wait to read this again. So if you like Marcus Zuzak, I definitely recommend checking this one out. And if you want to read a book by an Australian author set in Australia, then this is a good book to start with. And I can't wait to reread it. Hopefully I'll get around to it in the next couple of months. But yeah, this is a good book. And like I said, I can't remember what book I read in year 11, and thinking back, I don't think I did read a book in year 11. So moving on, the book that I read in year 12, I had to read in conjunction with watching the movie Blade Runner, which is actually quite a good movie. I definitely recommend it. So the book I had to read, if you couldn't guess by the fact that I had to watch Blade Runner, was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And so this was really my first taste of a classic, and yes, I had some trouble with it, but I was lucky in the fact that I listened to the audiobook, which was really good. Secondly, because it was year 12, we were handed like a tree's worth of handouts regarding the book and the movie and just everything. So that was really helpful because we got different summaries and different analyses for it. and I'm pretty sure I finished this. I definitely did, because I listened to most of it on audiobook. I definitely read some of it, but the audiobook helped so much, and I really enjoyed the story because I went into this knowing very little about Frankenstein, and it was really great to read a classic that was pretty quick and really interesting and just had so much depth to it, because from what I can remember from studying it, it's 3 stories in one. You've got, in the middle you have Frankenstein monster's story, then you have Frankenstein's story, and then you have the story that the sailor is telling his sister. And it was a good story, and I actually ended up reading this again in university last year, and technically I didn't read it or finish it for that, but I already knew about it, so it was alright. But yeah, this was really enjoyable, and I felt like it's a great first classic to read, and because it is a story that sort of everyone kind of knows about, it was really helpful with that as well. And because also we watched the movie Blade Runner, there are a lot of similarities between the 2 stories, which was also really good. So definitely check out Frankenstein if you haven't read it already. It's a really great read, really interesting, and really the story, the actual Frankenstein story, is a lot different to, I feel like, what a lot of people think the Frankenstein story is if they haven't read the books. So they are the 5 books that I read back in high school. I think they're the only 5 books. Like I said, I can't remember what the other one was, but if I remember it, or if anyone in Australia, in New South Wales, did English Advanced in 11 and 12, please tell me what book you read in year 11. That'd help me quite a bit. Probably not, because there was a whole list of things you could choose from, but it'd be really helpful to know what sort of books there were on offer. So let me know in the comments below what books you may have read in high school and whether you enjoyed them or not. I definitely enjoyed, obviously, all these books because I own them, and I'm keen to read them again out of the context of school and out of having to have a timeline and a deadline and an assignment to do on them. I just think it's going to be a lot more easy and relaxing. And yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't seen last week's video, I will link to it in the description below. Definitely go check it out if you are reading books in high school and you do want a bit of help or just a bit of reminding that it's alright, you can do it. Other than that, I'll see you guys very soon with my wrap up, haul and TBR. Bye!